I'm Dennis McCuistion, and my special guest today is former Congressman and House Majority Leader Dick Armey. Dick grew up in Cando, North Dakota. He studied to be an economist and then, in 1984, was elected to Congress here in Texas. On this program, you'll hear how and why he made those choices and what he found when he got to Washington. Dick, welcome back to the program after all these years.
Well, that's a pleasure.
It's great to see you. You grew up in Cando, North Dakota, and I bet that viewer never heard of that, but what a great name. What was it like?
Well, it's a small town of over 1,500 people. Everybody knew everybody, and it was my children. I wrote my book about my childhood, and my children and grandchildren thought I was living with Huck and Huck Finn. So they had a great life. It was good. It was a simple life and somewhat isolated. So there's an awful lot that was going on in the world that I just simply wasn't aware of.
Sure. Well, it makes sense. When you wrote that book, Leader, and that's only one of the books you wrote, but you wrote that book, Leader, I called it an autobiography, and it's a book that you as a viewer need to read, I can assure you. But you talked about your brothers and your family and all that. And you also talked about when you were maybe 18 or 19, getting a job, was it with the electric company?
Yeah.
Yeah, and you worked with the electric company all through college and other things. But the story that you told me years ago that I'll never forget was being out there, I think it's in the snow in the wintertime, and working on a pole, and you saw something and decided to change your life. What did you see, and why did you change your life?
It was a sleet storm, and we were working like 18-hour days more. I was on a 30-foot pole at 3 o'clock in the morning at 30 below zero, and off in the distance I saw the lights of what I thought was Jamestown, where two of my friends I recognized were snug and warm in their bed. And on that pole, on that day, at that moment, I decided I'm going to go to college. It had never occurred to me prior to that moment that I could or should go to college. So that was it was quite a moment to come to a revelation. I never considered any other college except the one whose lights I saw in the distance.
Isn't that something? Well, again, it's one of those things that the memory will never fade from you because it changed your life. And you, when you went to college, I don't think you had an idea of studying economics in the beginning, though, did you?
No. I was going to be an accountant. My mother wanted me to be an accountant. It was actually in my senior year, I realized I had more hours of economics than I did of accounting, and I loved the economics. And I didn't like the accounting. So I actually changed my major in my senior year.
Wow. You had a lot of great teachers, as we all did in college, but there was one teacher, I think he was blind, am I right?
Dr. Biggs, yes, he was blind.
Tell us about him and one of the things that he said to you that you've also never forgotten.
Well, I talked to Dr. Biggs, who, by the way, I always like to remind people the first guy to see potential in Dick Armey was a blind man. But I said I thought I might want to do economics. And he gave me a book written by Richard Leftwich, Microeconomics, which is the most difficult part of our discipline. He didn't feel qualified to teach me the course, so he asked me to take it and study it. And once I studied that book, I got my hands on it. It set my course for me. I came back and told him I thought it was a wonderful book and I loved every moment of it. And then he encouraged me to go on and do my graduate studies in economics.
Well, the books have been a big part of your life and my life, and probably a big part of that viewer watching as well. But there was another book that was written even before you and I were born, Dick. It's called The Wealth of Nations.
The Wealth of Nations.
Yeah. So tell that viewer what The Wealth of Nations is, who wrote it, and what impact it not only made on you, but makes in our life, especially with the kind of things that Adam Smith talked about.
Yeah, Adam Smith, in my way I look at it, he was the creator of the discipline of economics with that book. And the book was written to show the folly of big government and protectionist trade policies. and to demonstrate that the real wealth of a nation is its productivity and its resources. And I am a big fan of that one single book, which is the anchor to me of the entire discipline of economics. And I would argue that everything we've done in the discipline since Adam Smith can be found, at least some trace of it can be found in that book. So yes, it's a real North Star for me.
But in The Wealth of Nations, he talks about a concept that has been discussed forever, which is the invisible hand of the market. Talk to us about that.
Yeah, basically what he said, in a world of free transactions, bilateral exchanges, there aren't losers. Nobody gives up what they have for something else unless they believe they're going to win by it. And he makes the point, and this is extremely important, because prior to this time, people accumulated wealth by defeating other people or defrauding them. But Adam Smith said, in a world of free exchange, the butcher and the baker make their way, and they're guided as if by an invisible hand, that they prosper only by serving the needs of other people. And so the invisible hand became extremely important edification for just I have, as I always had for a long time, a motto: freedom works. In free exchanges, it works to everybody's advantage, and there are no losers.
Right. But one of the things you talked about, the invisible hand of the marketplace is great, but you also talked about the visible foot of the marketplace. What does that mean?
Yeah, no, it's not the invisible hand of government, the invisible foot, or the invisible hand of the market, invisible foot of government.
Right.
Actually, Milton Friedman inspired me to that notion. And basically what I'm saying is, when government forces exchanges, there's always a winner and there's always a loser. Mm-hmm. And a rational government, which is a rare thing, would say if the gain to the gainers is greater than the loss of the losers, it may be a worthwhile thing to do. But most government don't care. They care about, how's this affect my political future? Right. So what I'm saying is that we see all these great intentions of people in government doing this and that, but what we don't see is who gets hurt, who loses. We never see that. And the great French economist, whose name escapes, Bastiat.
Frederick Bastiat. Wait. I want to tell that person, there is at least one great French economist. For those of us who now live in France, Bastiat was the guy.
That
was
the guy.
A little skinny book called The Law.
And he also had Bastiat's rule that the economists must see what is seen and what is not seen. And what is not seen, when we celebrate how charitable and wonderful and generous our government is with other people's money, what we don't see is who gets hurt, who loses in the transaction.
Well, you know me, I've been a cynic about government for a long time, and I believe for many years that there's only one law in Washington, D.C. that works, and that's the law of unintended consequences. Am I right about that or not?
Well, what we call the law of unintended consequences is an alibi. There's never been an unintended consequence that was unforeseen. But, politicians get the bound tos. We're going to do this because it sounds nice. It's a sweet thing and our intentions are good. And they know damn well somebody's going to get hurt. And when it all crumbles on them, some goofy idea they conjured up, then they say, well, it wasn't my fault. It was the law of unintended consequence. That's alibi Ike, man.
Right, exactly.
It's just a phony business. But it happens. It happens because politicians have a mixed agenda, and they come first.
Right. Well, now you know that now because you've been in Congress, but taking you back to your days as an economist, you got your Ph.D. in economics from University of Oklahoma,
Yes.
was it? And then you taught some in West Texas. You had what you refer to as the November 22nd coincidences in your life. Tell that viewer about November 22nd.
Well, I reflect back, and I think that was very likely November 22nd when I was standing on that pole.
Uh-huh.
And then it was November 22nd when I defended my dissertation and became a PhD, which we call Independence Day, because now I'm my own man on my own terms. And then November 22nd, 2002 was my last day on the floor of the House of
No
Representatives.
kidding. And then, of course, November 22nd, 1963 was a terrible day in Dallas
right.
for John Kennedy. So November 22nd is a special day for you, for the good mostly, but sometimes for the bad. You taught at several places out in West Texas. You taught at the University of North Texas.
Mm-hmm.
So you were teaching in the 70s and early 80s. And I'm sure at that time that the economics department were just perfectly balanced. They had a few liberals over here, several conservatives. Why are you laughing at me, Dick?
No.
No. Well, what was it like?
Well, the economics department of North Texas was a kind of an interesting anomaly in economics. First of all, it was born out of the sociology department. And secondly, it was staffed primarily by what we call Ayersian institutionalists. Ayers was a cranky old guy at University of Texas that a lot of people emulated in the Southwest. They had a visceral contempt for traditional economic theory. Anything that was rigorous in analysis, they were contemptuous of. In fact, I was hired there because the dean of the business school told the dean of arts and sciences, if you don't get somebody in here that can teach rigorous microeconomics, I'm going to start my own department. Uh-huh. And I was the first real microeconomist that was ever invited into that economy. So, no, it was, and of course, left wing. I mean, anybody whose thinking is superficial and shallow and self-centered is going to be a leftist. I mean, that's just basically their nature. And so they were very liberal and very contemptuous of conservatism.
You had some challenges there. We won't go into all of those challenges, to say the least. But one of the things that also, I think, made a great impact on you as an economist is something called public choice theory. Yeah. So tell that viewer what public choice is and why you think it's so important.
Well, most economic analysis is analysis of the market, the private sector, production, distribution, and so forth. Public choice takes the discipline of economics and applies it to people in public office. And it's interesting because when I make a transaction, you make a transaction, we're making a unilateral transaction with the only consideration being what's in it for me, which is quite right. When a person in public office makes a transaction, he is making a transaction we use somebody else's resources on behalf of somebody else here. And as I said earlier, there's never a loser in bilateral private transactions. But there's always a loser in public transactions. But it goes beyond. The first axiom of public choice theory is they'll tend to their own business before they tend to yours.
That's sort of human nature, though, isn't it?
It is human nature.
We're all acting in our own self-interest, but somehow before public choice, a lot of the people, media and individuals, sort of thought that when you became a politician or a congressman or whatever, that you would start acting in the public interest as opposed to your own interest. And the public choice folks said what?
No, they act in their own self-interest. In fact, I characterize public choice economics as a study of the aberrant behavior of people in public office. And I further point out it's the closest thing to criminology we have in our discipline. But the fact of the matter is, public behavior, well, I have another one. The original Army's axiom. Army's axiom number one, the market's rational, the government's dumb. Well, why is that? In the market, we're working for ourselves, and justifiably so. In government, we are supposed to be working for others, but we're in fact working for ourselves, and they make stupid decisions.
Yeah. Well, we had, and you met these people. I met one of them. Jim Buchanan was on our program in the
Jim
early
Buchanan.
90s. Gordon Tullock was on the other.
Tullock,
You knew
cranky
Tullock.
old guy, but I loved him.
Yeah. And of course, Steve Pevich wasn't a public choice guy, but he was one of our favorite economists and friends of yours and mine, et cetera. And you and I had met when you were at the University of North Texas, and I had you come down to Irving to speak to some groups, et cetera. And then I want to play this video clip about a very important meeting that you and I had. So when you're ready, let's run that clip.
Okay.
You called me up one day and said, Dennis, let's go to lunch. And you and I had known each other casually, not well. And you took me to a lunch at an awful Chinese restaurant.
Big mistake.
Yeah, that restaurant is still open, however, I might tell you that. And it's still awful. But nevertheless, you said to me back in those days, here's what you said. You said, I'm thinking about something, and I'm calling a few people whose opinion I value. Why you call me, I'm not sure yet, and neither are you, based on the story I'm about to tell. But you said, I'm thinking about running for Congress. What do you think? And I asked you two questions. Question number one was, are you crazy? So I ask you now, after 17 years, are you crazy? Yes or no?
No, I am not. And I, you know, we all have to look back and we worry about how we used our time. But I have to tell you, there's an awful lot that I honestly believe that's good for my children's future, for freedom in their life. That would not have happened had I not gone to Washington. I believe that.
But I want to get to the second question, Dick, that I asked you that day, and because it relates to what we're talking about here. When you were sitting there talking to me about what you think you'd like to do, you sound a lot like Tom Hawken, as a matter of fact, if I may say so. But the second question I asked you, and the only one that was really serious, was this: can you run and can you win and keep your integrity?
Yes.
Okay, that's what you said at the time.
I tell you, I not only can do it, but I have done it.
All right, but here's my question to you, I'm not arguing with you on that. I'm certainly agreeing with you as far as I know, but then again, I'm not married to you or anything else, and don't want to be as far as that goes. We don't want to go there.
Let's hope not.
Thank you. But
We won't start talking about Barney
my
Frank.
question is this. Because
Well, first place, Dick, I bet that viewer right now is probably saying to him or herself, those two guys don't look a day older than they did.
I have no
Don't you
doubt
imagine
about
it?
it. Absolutely.
No
yeah.
question about it. All right. But secondly, as I just looked at that clip, I believe that it was Gene Campbell that I was standing next to.
Absolutely.
So tell that viewer a little bit about Gene Campbell, but and also how great the staff that you had was who worked with you during.
Well, Gene Campbell was actually a student of mine when I made the decision. She was in my night class. She was an older student, and she was, of course, brilliant and much fun. And she was my first campaign volunteer. The day the story broke that I was going to run for Congress, the day after I went to my office, and early in the morning, there was a note under my door from Gene Campbell wanting to volunteer.
Wow.
And then she volunteered, and she was a big part of my winning first race and stayed with me. Even after I left Congress, she stayed with me another 10 years.
Wow.
And she and Leon are lifetime friends of Susan and me. Brilliant woman. I had the best description of Gene Campbell ever. I said, every time I hear Dolly Parton sing the Mule Skinner Blues, I think of Gene Campbell with that country confident competence.
Wow.
And that's what she could do everything and never made a mistake. And you talk about a person of conviction and commitment. She's the Lord's child for sure.
Well, you had that during your campaign. You were running against former mayor of Arlington, Tom Vandergriff, and everybody figured, I mean, he was a shoo-in. He was going to win. He was the Democrat. He was the incumbent. How did you win that election?
Well, the fact of the matter is, I knew I was going to win when I entered it. One of the things I figured out about politicians, watching them after I got involved with public choice, is they're very shallow thinkers, and they're really not very bright people for the most part. And their criteria of choice is pretty superficial. So they're looking at things like name, ID, and so forth. Well, I went in and I looked at the district. I looked at the precincts, precinct by precinct by precinct. And the votes were there. Tom Vandergrift stumbled into that win 2 years earlier for a variety of reasons. But in '84, Ronald Reagan was running for re-election. Phil Gramm was going to be our Senate candidate, and I was going to be number 3 on the ticket. Man, for the most part, I didn't have to do a whole lot more than just sit there and let the draft carry me along.
Well, I think you're being very modest there, because I read your book and I know that that's not the case. But you talked to some important people before you ran, other than just me. And again, I don't know why the hell you talked to me, but the Chinese food was okay. You talked to Eddie Childs, gave you some money.
Right.
Eddie Childs, that person probably doesn't remember Eddie Childs, but he was in the oil business, and I think he always said, if you don't have an oil well, get one, didn't
yeah.
he?
He also
But he was
said
a
that.
supporter, right?
Eddie Childs and I met because he was on the board of North Texas State, and he complaining to one of the other board members, is there no such thing as a free market economist on this faculty? The guy said, oh yeah, we got one. We got one, Dick Armey, and Eddie wanted to meet him. So Eddie Childs bought me dinner, a steak dinner, at the Ranchman's Cafe in Ponder, Texas. That's how I met him. Well, I also knew he was a wise man and a good conservative, and I did talk to him, and he did give me an enormous amount of encouragement, and frankly told a lot of his good friends about me, and I will always be in his debt.
One of the people, it may have been a friend of Child's, I'm not sure, but one of the people who was instrumental financially and in several anecdotal ways was a guy named John Stemmons. Oh. And so in reading their book about the meeting that you had with Stemmons, I just broke up. Tell that viewer what it was like.
Yeah, Bum Bright set me up on that one. Bum Bright sent me over there to see Stemmons, and of course it was pretty impressive because you're on Stemmons Freeway and you go into Stemmons building and you go to the top floor, and I walk in and here's this guy sitting behind his desk, and he launches into me in the most profane terms you can imagine. I don't want any of you dang Republicans coming in here, that dang fool Bum Bright keeps sending you, I'm a Democrat, I've been a Democrat. He cussed me up one side and down the other. I thought I might not get out with my life. Then all of a sudden he says to his secretary, well, give this guy a check so I can get him the heck out of here. She says, I already have it written. Anyway, I went back there 9 times. For 9 different elections.
Right.
He cussed me out every time. And he added Phil Gramm to Bum Bright and cussed them out too. And every time we parted, never had a kind word from the man. Wow. But we both parted laughing because he had cussed me out good and I had picked his pocket. We had the best time. And it was one of the most fun things about raising money I ever experienced.
Well, you were there in Congress then for the last 4 years of Reagan's term, and you met a lot of interesting people. You knew Phil Gramm before. Phil was on our program last year with the latest book he wrote about on inequality. But tell us about him and your relationship, since you were both economists, and the fact that he started out to be a Democrat and then did what?
Well, he changed parties. Then he got right. Now you got to understand. There was a time when I first came to Texas, Texas Democrats were more free market conservative than most of the Yankee Republicans I'd grown up with. And Phil was one of those fellas. Phil Gramm is the best person as a member of Congress in every respect that I was privileged to work with. He's brighter than the rest of them. He worked harder. He was serious about his work, and he was one of the kindest people I knew. And if I look back at my years in Washington, Phil Graham's the best friend I ever had during that time. I love the man. I love him dearly, and I try every day of my life to be just like him.
Well, the two of you, with you in the House and working, let's just say, up the leadership thing in the late 80s, and then of him in the Senate, so had two economists. It's rare to have economists in Congress, as we know, typically lawyers or in some cases businessmen. But you then saw the transition then from Ronald Reagan to George H.W. Bush.
Right.
What was your thinking at the time?
That was a big drop off. I've never been a fan of George H.W. Bush. I put him down as a politician. I put him down as a globalist. I often wondered if he had any defined reason why he wanted to be president and what he wanted to do with it. And I think the evidence that he did not is found in his lackluster effort to get reelected, because he had no aspiration, nothing he wanted to do. He'd done the only thing he'd ever wanted to do. He'd been president. And so I don't put him down as a man of much dedication and serious purpose.
Well, we're at the end of the first segment here, talking about your life and moving from an economist to a congressman. So we're going to call a halt here, but in that next segment, so I want that viewer to think about this as segment one. The next segment, Dick, we're going to talk about what happened at the end of the George Bush time, and then from 1994 when you became the House Majority Leader. So if you would be kind enough to join us in the next session, we would appreciate it. For now, look at McCuistionTV.com or PerspectivesMatter.com, which is even better. Join us on social media, because as always, we're here giving you perspectives about things that matter with people who care.